Taoiseach, are any of these press advisors the people who researched a speech of mine back in 2016 to inform your earlier attempts at deflection over the student nurses and midwives? And I wonder, would their time not have been better spent overnight, instead of looking at a speech of mine about FEMPI in 2016, looking at whether or not the dozens, hundreds of testimonies from student nurses and midwives about their systematic work exploitation with the sick, with those with COVID, with those giving birth, would those advisors not have been better use looking at those testimonies and finding out whether the nonsense you're getting from the HSE is in fact the nonsense that we and the student nurses and midwives, most important, know it to be? So I'd just be curious, who did that research and why were they not busy actually verifying a far more important issue about the hundreds of nurses and midwives who say they're being systematically exploited and not paid for the work that they are doing on the front line?
Could I also say that the Deputy Boyd Barrett's point, it doesn't take 2 minutes, Deputy Boyd Barrett, to check out a speech that you gave in 2016. But the bottom line is, well, we have. Actually, there's an investigation being established, and the Minister is making sure that, and as I say, I don't know whether you have submitted your testimonies for investigation. I think, no, I think the investigation through this year should happen, because I think exploitation should not be tolerated, and student nurses should not be abused and should not be exploited. They should not be exploited, and any exploitation that takes place, I genuinely believe, should be investigated. And if you have evidence of that, and I have no doubt you may have, it should be forwarded to the authorities, and we will protect the nurses concerned and the student nurses concerned, that those issues would be investigated. They need to be investigated because it's wrong. It shouldn't happen. And the culture, the old culture, old habits die hard, Deputy. And the whole transformation of nurse education is not something we should just erode and happily go along with, which is what you are really suggesting. And you have not dealt with that question at all in any of your comments on this to date. And I just have to say that. And also, your speech basically back in 2016 meant, and the People Before Profits position was, that FEMPI should be repealed in its entirety. If you repeal it in its entirety, it would have meant that the pension reversals that you and others refer to, Deputy Murphy and yourself, they would have got their higher pensions, and they would have had their cuts reversed back in 2016, not now in 2021, where legally the Minister had no choice, because in 2017 this House passed legislation to say that the latest date in which a Minister could delay the last cohort of those whose pensions and pay was cut as a result of FEMPI, the last date you could hold out was the end of this month. That's legally, that's the law passed by this Parliament. Now you seem to think that the Minister, Michael McGrath, should just break the law. That's what you're saying. That he must ignore the law passed by this House in 2017, which you were all involved in at the time. And no, you can't. You can't actually do that without undermining the entire edifice, and that's the point. But but of course, you pretend that this is a deliberate, premeditated act to look after the high rollers, and you know damn well it's not. You know it's not. And if you had your way, you would have been doing it in 2016. That's what you proposed at the time. That's the reality. But I think taxation is the way to deal with that. We've one of the most progressive taxation systems in Europe. And the higher you earn in this country, the more you should be taxed. And that is the case. That is the reality. And that's the fairest way to deal with this. Not the approach that you take, which is just short-term political opportunism, deliberately distorting the truth, and deliberately giving false narratives in terms of the motivations of the current holders of office in government, when the current Minister for Public Expenditure had simply no legal choice. And the Attorney General's advice is exactly the same as the previous Attorney General's advice and the one before that.
Thank you, Taoiseach.